Hello, my name is Briana Farro. I'm the Global Technical Director for Endpoint and EDR at McAfee. Thanks for joining us today as we discuss using proactive threat intelligence to predict and get ahead of adversaries. If we take a look at the threat intelligence cycle, we'll notice that there's a common theme used across organizations. First, we go through a stage of planning, where we take a look at what our intelligence requirements are, the adversary knowledge that we either have or would like to obtain, and critical intelligence sources for us. As we continue down that path, we'll look to understand how we can collect this information. Will we need internal log collection, open source? Will we use different threat data subscriptions? And ultimately, how do we understand what's a trusted source for threat intelligence and what isn't? Next, we have to look at processing this data and what we're going to use to do so. Are we going to use sticks and taxi? Are we going to use a threat intelligence platform to help us process all of the information and telemetry that we're receiving? What analytics might we want to apply? And ultimately, as we move into that analysis, after we've allowed automated analysis to take place, are we going to add human analysis on top of that? How are we going to make sure that that priority determination of that threat intelligence is made, or how do we set the priority based on the threat intelligence source? Lastly, we need to disseminate that information in our environment. We need to be able to translate it into business language reports for usage within our organization for all levels to understand why this threat intelligence is important. We need to identify specific indicators of compromise. And most importantly, we need it to integrate into our SOC tools in order to actually be used and to potentially be leveraged to enhance our endpoint or network or cloud controls, maybe even share with partners, or if we're part of an organization that shares threat intelligence, contributing to that as well. So what are some of the threat intelligence common patterns that we come across as an organization? Well, as we mentioned, not only do we have to plan and direct what we're going to do around threat intelligence, but we have to identify the definition of requirements that we have and the course of actions that we might define based on that threat intelligence. We need to collect, aggregate, validate that threat intelligence from multiple sources. And then ultimately, we're going to use this to either improve detection and our investigations and security operations, or we may use that threat intelligence to automatically improve the protection, as we mentioned in our threat intelligence circle. From a knowledge perspective, where does threat intelligence come into play? Well, if we take a look at when we have a part of information, we take a look at threat intelligence feeds, for example. We know that we have raw data from which we garner information and derive context. By analytics through things like threat intelligence platform services, we derive meaning and we provide knowledge from that data and that information. But how do we elevate to wisdom? By adding insights. With threat intelligence feeds, we find that we can obtain a certain level of reaction. We've identified parts, we have some information, and we can be reactive based on that information. For example, I know that I have a bad file hash that a threat intelligence source that I trust, maybe it's a government agency, has relayed to me. I want to make sure that I'm blocking any instances of that hash in my environment, regardless of the medium by which they come through or the vector by which they come through. Using that information, I can be reactive and block that hash. Now, with threat intelligence services, we move a little bit forward and we become proactive and predictive because we're able to correlate threat and intel with threat actors and with their associated campaigns. So now we come to that knowledge level that we talked about. We're connecting some of the pieces of information to have more knowledge. With McAfee mVision Insights, we strive to provide wisdom by combining the connections and the components and parts into a whole. We provide prescriptive advice, and we'll take a deeper look at how we do this in a bit. In 2019, we saw some really interesting threat research examples. We saw highly sophisticated ransomware, which targeted detonation in specific regions in Sodinokibi. We saw a vulnerability which attacked legacy systems, as well as a vulnerability that targeted certain types of devices like IoT devices. And all of these exposed potential exploits that could have damaged environments significantly. Earlier this year, we saw Curveball emerge, a cryptographic vulnerability that allowed signing of a malicious payload with a proper certificate, making it peer trusted. Considering the significance of the vulnerability, one of the things that McAfee's threat researchers were most concerned by was the time to weaponize this. It was released in January 14th, and as we looked through the ways that our solution and portfolio could protect at all layers within an organization, we slowly monitored whether or not somebody had released a payload for this. And sure enough, 3 days after the attack, this vulnerability was weaponized. So why is that important? Well, we need to ask ourselves, does our endpoint address our entire attack lifecycle? Most organizations were focused on detecting and, when needed, investigating and responding. Well, what are our pain points around that? We have a vastly expanding attack surface with devices of all different types in all different places, some managed, some not, some in areas that we may not have direct access to or that are closed off from our typical management systems. We may have a lack of visibility because those are closed environments compared to the rest of our infrastructure. And we may have fatigue from alerts and overhead of trying to manage these systems and understand what I need to focus on and what I don't at my organization. All of this leads to increased costs and complexities, and our defenses are not where we want them to be. So why do I have to start at the point of where I'm hit? Why can't I look to shift left and start earlier in the life cycle of an attack when my adversaries are planning and ultimately launching that? I want to be able to prioritize, predict, and prescribe what's important in my environment, what I need to focus on, and where I need to be proactive and take action. To do this, we need intelligent and proactive endpoint security. This starts with behavioral blocking and exploit prevention, the ability to block against common advanced tactics like fileless threats, and absolutely to have machine learning as well to shift left and prevent attacks as early as possible in their life cycle. When I'm unable to automatically prevent, I need continuous monitoring and multi-sensor telemetry to help me analyze detections of where I may have a challenge or a concern in my environment. Continuing through, I want to apply AI-guided analysis mapped to MITRE attack frameworks that helps me hunt in real time to investigate why that detection could be something that I need to be concerned about. And when I get to a point that I recognize that I am concerned and I need to isolate that attack in my environment, I want to use that actionable intelligence to take on a real-time response at scale throughout my organization and potentially have remediation that's going to action on my trigger of isolating and executing on that attack. Finally, I want to take that security posture information, those proactive, intelligent components that allowed me to understand how that attack made it into my environment. I want to look at my configuration assessment and the potential exposure that I have by vulnerabilities that are available in my environment. And I want to use that to manage my attack surface. I want to do that after the fact, but more importantly, I want to shift left and do that before the attack as much as possible. At McAfee, we help that intelligent endpoint solution become proactive with a huge network of global threat intelligence and telemetry. With sensors all over the world, we're able to leverage this information to see more, protect more, and offer the strongest threat intelligence included. So let's take a look at how an intelligent and proactive security solution fueled by threat intelligence can help an organization proactively predict, detect, and respond to an attack. Here I am My name is Briana, and I'm the CEO of Briana.org. What I'm taking a look at here is the McAfee mVision Insights dashboard where my SOC begins their day. One of my SOC analysts is signing on for her or his shift, and they're noticing that our security posture is not looking too great. At 56%, they're trying to understand why McAfee is flagging for us that we have such a low posture and a significant concern with our environment. The analyst also sees that McAfee is currently tracking 568 campaigns of differing severities, and that there have been associated detections in our environment to those campaigns, as well as some devices that require isolation, and even further, others that McAfee is flagging have insufficient coverage. Most importantly, out of those 568 campaigns, McAfee is proactively advising my security analyst that there are 9 that require our attention. As I can see, these different campaigns are prioritized. I can see that they're color-coded, and they are prioritized based on things like sector, geo, and predicted countermeasure effectiveness within our environment. Additionally, I can see if McAfee is advising that we are seeing more or less of this campaign, which may be an indicator that our organization is being targeted. I can also compare this to what this threat is doing worldwide, and it clearly flags for me whether or not we have potentially exposed devices. Finally, I can understand where that insufficient coverage flag is coming, because I can also see that for this particular campaign, Operation Iron Ore, I have at least 3 devices in my environment that do not have sufficient coverage to withstand an attack from this campaign. So if I go ahead and drill in to the Operation Iron Ore campaign, I can also see that McAfee is giving me a summary of what this threat and this campaign is actually doing. I can see that it is a spear phishing style attack that uses emails either with suspicious links or attachments to try to infiltrate into an environment and ultimately to gain sensitive data and exfiltrate it out of the environment. I can see who the threat actor behind this campaign is, and I can also see some additional details like which IOCs specifically were detected in my environment associated with this campaign. I can understand, again, if I'm being targeted and seeing this more or less than others. And from a geographical representation, I can understand what this threat is doing worldwide. I can see from the map here that it's not very prevalent worldwide, but it certainly does seem to be prevalent in my environment. I see whether or not I have those infected devices, and I get a little bit more information here on what the detection means. Do I have devices that have failed to resolve the campaign and the attack? And how many do I have that have been able to handle that, and across what number of devices? In regards to the insufficient coverage, I have a prediction of any devices that could potentially be breached by an attack from this campaign because they do not have the required coverage, those items in red, that content level, to protect against this. And finally, I can understand specifically whether or not it actually detonated within my environment. For my SOC analyst, who may not manage the deployment of this solution and the content, it provides additional information prescribing exactly how he or she can engage with their counterpart or take action to update the content to ensure that those devices that are currently at risk for this campaign are detected. Digging in a little bit deeper to Operation Iron Ore, I can see that I have the associated MITRE techniques observed for this campaign flagged for me by McAfee. I can see things like command line interface execution, and also that there is data encoding and data encryption, both common tactics and techniques used when trying to exfiltrate data and bypass other security controls. I receive a mapping to the attack enterprise matrix, and I can also understand what else is available to me to try to investigate this campaign. Are there any MITRE tools or any information on Malpedia that can help me understand this further as I look to investigate? So at the same time that my SOC analyst is taking a proactive look at the risks that have been highlighted for us by McAfee, my users are going about their day. John, for example, is pretty excited because recently he received a note about an equity award And now he's receiving a notice about an important meeting from HR. He's assuming that it's related, so he goes ahead and clicks on this WebEx link to join the meeting. What he doesn't realize is that in the background, this WebEx is not really WebEx. As I can see from the IP address, I'm certainly not mapping to some sort of a WebEx link here, and there is a vulnerability within the WebEx plugin that's being taken advantage of. However, with the protections that are applied to John's machine, we actually have a detection. And we can see, if we dig in a little bit closer, that there was a PowerShell encoded command that was attempted to run to try to execute this payload against this vulnerability and connect out to an external server. By being able to leverage our fileless detection, we're able to read that encoded command in clear text. And I can see the details there, which show me that this was trying to connect out for malicious purposes. Thankfully for us, John doesn't have to worry any further because the attack was stopped in his device. In parallel, my VP of Marketing, Omar, is super excited because we're gearing up for our annual event. Because of recent events, we're holding this event virtually, and that requires us to get collateral out to our registrants before the event in order to make it interactive. Omar sees an email come in from Amazon that his package is shipped, and he is super excited to hear that because that means it's going to arrive timely for our registrants. So he goes ahead, he clicks on the link, and he sees, all right, it's shipped out and it's going to get there on time. Yet again, though, Omar may not notice that there's a suspicious IP address here, and potentially he's not actually being routed to Amazon. At the same time, our SOC analyst, who started their day by proactively taking a look at what damage Operation Iron Core could do in our environment and potentially the systems that required some sort of proactive action, he sees an alert pop up based on chrome.exe in our EDR console. Switching to a sequential view, he can see that Outlook, Chrome, Cisco WebEx Start, and even Command Line are involved here. So digging deeper, you can see that Chrome executed a connection out to an external web address. Even though Amazon is involved in the URL, there is no Amazon.com here, and this is extremely suspicious. Going a little bit further, we can see that a command line ultimately was executed with what appears to be a squibbly-do attack. This is where our adversary is taking advantage of that WebEx plugin vulnerability in our environment. At this point, our SOC analyst is satisfied that he has seen enough to move forward and take action to create an investigation to delve into this further. By creating an investigation, our solution goes ahead and applies AI analytics and asks some common questions so that our analysts at any level are able to understand certain things that are abnormal about the events that have occurred. For example, do I see any sockets being opened by processes who do not commonly do so? And sure enough, my SOC analyst sees PowerShell trying to pipe out to the internet, and look at that, it's looking to download a payload.txt file. If he looks at his graphical view, he can see that this ultimately shows a connection to an IP address, again, validating the external connection out, and then ultimately connects to another PowerShell event, which instantiates a connection to try to download a Mimikatz variant into the environment. At this point, our analyst is extremely concerned that there's something going on with Omar's machine and potentially with Omar's credentials, since Mimikatz is used to compromise and collect credentials. My analyst can now take additional action. He can potentially revoke or suspend Omar's credentials, take Omar's machine off the network, or continue to investigate through the environment to see where else this activity may be occurring. That includes extending queries to our SIM. At the same time, I have been working so hard to get our B-Power event moving that I am beat. I take a seat at my computer and I decide to pull up some pictures that a coworker has sent me. While I'm looking through them, I notice a new file on my desktop, and I decide that my IT staff or my marketing team must have put that there for my review related to our upcoming event. I go ahead and click on it. There's nothing suspicious about ransomware.exe, right? Immediately, I am extremely concerned. There are files popping up on my desktop, changes happening to my files. I can't see the pictures anymore. Oh no, did I just execute ransomware on my system? How is this going to impact our environment? What am I going to tell the board? As I worry, I see a pop-up come up, which indicates to me that the ransomware.exe file seems to have been detected confidently and being malicious. I also see that ransomware file is no longer existent on my desktop, and those awesome pictures that my coworker had sent me are back for my review. I'm so happy that my IT staff was cognizant enough to recognize that myself, other executives in our environment, and our entire organization could be under attack at different levels and apply these different features and functionalities to protect us. Biggest advantage here, I'm not taken out of my workday. As I mentioned before, I have a lot going on to prepare for this event. I don't seem to have lost data. It seems to be available to me again. I may reach out to my help desk just to have them check, but with this rollback to a good state, I don't have to wait for an engineer to come and restore my data or rebuild my machine. This is fantastic because I have a lot to do, and now I'm more comfortable that I didn't cause massive damage to my organization. So, what use cases did we just walk through for Briana's organization? Well, we saw how her team was able to manage the attack surface. They were able to take a look at what potential threats were occurring in their environment, as well as potentially could occur. And they were able to take proactive action to protect those systems that did not have sufficient coverage. At the same time, we saw that this attack was able to be prevented on multiple systems. And where it wasn't able to be prevented, we had automatic responses that were able to handle the attack once it was convicted definitively, and then restore the system to a good state. Where we weren't able to automatically handle the threat or remediate, we were able to detect. And with that detection, our SOC team was able to understand that they needed to extend that and investigate further throughout their environment. And ultimately, they saw that they had a very large concern with that event and that user's system. And then finally, we were able to reduce our total cost of ownership because we didn't have to take systems out of commission. And where we did, we were able to do so quickly to isolate the threat, and hopefully it spread within our environment. We were able to not have to rebuild the system and take time away not only from our engineers, but our users and our business, because our users cannot get their work done in a day. Why is this important? Because we all have threat readiness challenges in our organizations. We are trying to understand, are we at risk and what is a priority? We're also trying to understand, are we susceptible? And ultimately, will our protections hold against these attacks? And what do we need to change to be protected? And what are the high operational costs that go along with that? Previously, to understand if I were at risk, I'd have to conduct an assessment either internally or using a third-party vendor. This could cost me anywhere from $7,000 to $8,000, and it would take 2 weeks of time to conduct this assessment and understand if I was susceptible and whether or not I'd be able to detect and protect against a single campaign. With mVision Insights, McAfee is able to take all of the telemetry and global and threat intelligence that they have and apply that to known campaigns. Then take that information and analyze against your environment whether or not you would be able to withstand an attack from that campaign. And if not, what configurations and components you need to have in place from the solution in order to do so. We're able to reduce the time that you need to understand whether or not you're susceptible to an attack from weeks to maybe an hour at a fraction of the cost. And we're not assessing this against one campaign, we're assessing against 100+ campaigns per day. As we saw in the dashboard for Briana organization, there were 568 at the moment. So not only was McAfee's Insight solution able to provide the organization the ability to analyze against multiple campaigns without additional effort from their staff, but it was able to proactively prescribe when they needed to take immediate action. We need to get ahead of our adversaries. We need protection across the entire life cycle, and we have to have that and understand how we obtain it by assessing both threats and risk simultaneously. With mVision Insights, McAfee is offering you the opportunity to get ahead of those adversaries. We're the only intelligent and proactive endpoint security solution offering you the ability to proactively identify and prioritize threats that may be relevant to you, assess whether or not your security posture would be able to withstand those threats, and then provide preemptive security configurations that you can action on to proactively protect yourself and your environment. So what's next for EDR? As most of you are probably familiar with, the term XDR stands for extending your detection and response beyond the endpoint. Think of it as an enterprise-level detection and response. For McAfee, we think of this as being device-to-cloud detection and response. And from an endpoint perspective, we feel that you need to focus on expanding your visibility and investigation of attacks not just on Windows-based systems, but on Linux, Mac, Android, iOS, and all types of devices. If your attack surface includes those devices, then your visibility needs to include them, and your ability to investigate on those systems certainly does as well. You want to be able to connect those potential attacks, as well as attempted and successful attacks, and map those to common tactics, techniques, and protocols that are leveraged by adversaries using a common framework like MITRE's attack matrices. You want to have automatic triage occurring and remediation where available. And again, you need this to integrate with all of your SOC tools and your existing workflows, because you do not have time to retrain people on different workflows, and you have other components of your environment that we need to integrate into. From an overall SecOps perspective, this integration means being able to absorb telemetry from a third party and adding that to the active triage and investigation that's happening for your analysts. You want those advanced analytics to be applied across all the telemetry that you have. You want it to pipe out prescriptive threat remediation for you. And again, you want this to map the detections against common behaviors that allow us to identify particular adversaries who may be targeting us. And finally, as you look to move to the cloud and your perimeter edge in whatever format that may be, you need visibility and investigation of attacks across that surface as well. The last thing you want to have happen is allow an attack into your on-premises environment coming from a cloud-based component. That cloud may mean very different things. Perhaps it's a private cloud, perhaps it's a public cloud, perhaps it's hybrid. With those different options, you may have varying levels of control and visibility. But you need visibility and investigation of those attacks across cloud native controls, VMs, containers, and even serverless services. We again need to map those to the appropriate MITRE attack matrix to understand what's relevant for those environments and how that maps overall connecting to any sort of potential source that can be internal or external. Finally, we need that triage and remediation to include cloud-specific configuration vulnerabilities, cloud-specific assessment. I cannot assess what would be happening in a cloud container against what would typically be vulnerable on a Windows system. And lastly, you need an API. You're not going to accomplish the integration needed and support your DevOps and DevSecOps teams and the integrations that they're developing for you without APIs. For us, XDR is device-to-cloud detection and response. Thanks so much for joining us today for this session and our discussion. Are there any questions?